The text message arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while I was grading papers in my small apartment. My phone buzzed against the stack of essays, and I glanced at the screen to see my aunt's name. My heart lifted. Aunt Margaret rarely texted, preferring long phone calls that stretched into the evening. Perhaps she wanted to chat about the upcoming family reunion or share another story about her garden. Hi, Emma. Hope you're well. Just wanted to let you know that Sarah's engagement photos turned out beautiful. Can't wait for the wedding next month. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the words fully registered. Sarah's wedding. Next month, the cousin I'd grown up with, shared summers with, confided my teenage secrets to, was getting married, and this was the first I'd heard of it. My fingers trembled as I typed back, "Wedding?" I didn't know Sarah was engaged. When's the big day? The response came quickly. Oh, honey, I thought you knew. It's June 15th at the Riverside Country Club. She's been planning for months. June 15th. That was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks, and nobody had mentioned it to me. Not Sarah, not my mother, not any of my cousins. I sat back in my chair, the red pen still clutched in my hand, trying to process this revelation. Sarah and I had been inseparable as children. Our mothers were sisters, and we'd spent every holiday, every summer vacation, every family gathering together. We'd been each other's maid of honor in our childhood games, promising that when we grew up, we'd stand beside each other on our real wedding days. Even as adults, despite living in different cities, we'd maintained our closeness through calls, texts, and visits. Or so I'd thought. I called my mother immediately. Mom, did you know about Sarah's wedding? There was a pause, the kind that speaks volumes. Oh, sweetie. You did know. It wasn't a question. Emma, yes, I knew. I received an invitation last month. And you didn't think to tell me? Another pause. I assumed you'd gotten one too. It never occurred to me that, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. After hanging up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I'd been working on finally clicking into place. The family group chat that had gone mysteriously quiet in recent months. The way conversations stopped when I entered rooms during Easter dinner, Sarah's increasingly brief responses to my messages, the canceled coffee dates, the missed calls that went unreturned. I wasn't just excluded from the wedding, I had been deliberately erased from it. The next few days passed in a haze of hurt and confusion. I reached out to other cousins, trying to understand what had happened. The responses were variations of the same uncomfortable theme. Oh, Sarah wanted to keep it small, or maybe there was a mix-up with the invitations, or my personal favorite, I'm sure she'll call you soon to explain. But Sarah never called, and when I finally gathered the courage to reach out to her directly, her response was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive deflection. Emma, I've been meaning to call you. Things have been so crazy with wedding planning. You know how it is. We had to make some really tough decisions about the guest list. The venue has such limited space, and with both families being so large, I'm sure you understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that my cousin, the girl who used to braid dandelions in my hair and promise we'd be sisters forever, had chosen to cut me out of the most important day of her life. What I didn't understand was why. The answer came from an unexpected source. My youngest cousin, Michael, barely 21, and still possessing the brutal honesty that age hadn't yet taught him to temper. Emma, can I ask you something? He said when I ran into him at the grocery store. Did you and Sarah have a fight or something? Not that I know of. Why? He shifted uncomfortably. It's just, at Easter, when you went to help Aunt Julie in the kitchen, Sarah was talking about the wedding. Someone asked if you were going to be a bridesmaid, and Sarah got this look on her face. She said something about how you've always tried to be the center of attention in the family, and she didn't want any drama at her wedding. The words hit me like a physical blow. She said I try to be the center of attention? Michael nodded reluctantly. And then my mom said something about how you've always been the successful one, and Sarah deserved to have her day without being overshadowed. I thought it was really unfair. You've never been anything but supportive. That night, I lay awake piecing together Sarah's resentment. It was true that things had gone well for me professionally. After graduating from college, I'd landed a teaching position at a prestigious private school. Last year, I'd published a children's book that had gained modest success. I'd bought my own apartment, traveled to Europe, seemed to have my life together. Meanwhile, Sarah had struggled through a series of dead-end jobs, a messy breakup that had lasted 2 years, and financial troubles that had forced her to move back in with her parents. But I had never, not once, flaunted my success or made her feel lesser. If anything, I tried to be supportive, lending her money when she needed it, celebrating her small victories, being a shoulder to cry on during her low points. Apparently, my very existence had become a reminder of what she felt she lacked. The realization that my success, my life, had been perceived as a threat was almost more painful than the exclusion itself. I had been punished not for anything I'd done, but for who I was and what I'd achieved. As June 15th approached, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I would not let this consume me. I would not reach out again, would not beg for explanations or inclusion. I would maintain my dignity, even if it meant grieving the loss of a relationship I'd treasured my entire life. On the morning of Sarah's wedding, I woke early and went for a long run through the park near my apartment. The June air was crisp and clean, full of promise. I spent the day reading, cooking myself a nice dinner, and calling an old friend from college. I did not check social media. I did not drive past the country club. I did not allow myself to wallow in self-pity, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it. I thought about Sarah in her white dress, walking down an aisle I should have helped her choose. I thought about the family gathering I'd been excluded from, the toasts I wouldn't hear, the dancing I wouldn't share. Most of all, I thought about the little girl who used to hold my hand during thunderstorms and tell me I was her best friend in the whole world. The first hint that something had gone wrong came in a text from my mother at 8:47 p.m. "Emma, are you awake? Can you call me?" When I called, she sounded shaken. "Honey, I don't even know how to tell you this, but there was an incident at the wedding." "What kind of incident?" "Well, you know how Sarah was so particular about everything being perfect? She hired that expensive photographer, the one from the city, spent months planning every detail." "Mom, what happened?" "The photographer didn't show up." I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sympathy. "What do you mean, didn't show up?" "Apparently, there was some confusion with the booking. Sarah's been calling him for hours, but his phone goes straight to voicemail. It turns out he had Sarah's wedding down for next Saturday, not today. The contract clearly states June 22nd, not June 15th. I was quiet, processing this information. "But that's not the worst part," my mother continued. "The flowers were wrong, too. Sarah ordered white roses and peonies. What they delivered were red carnations and baby's breath. The florist says that's what the order form specified, but Sarah is insisting she never ordered carnations. She broke down crying right there in front of everyone. Oh no. And then during the ceremony, it started raining. I mean, really pouring. The outdoor ceremony they'd planned had to be moved inside. But the backup indoor space was much smaller. They couldn't fit all the guests. Some people had to stand in the hallway. By the end of the call, I had learned that Sarah's perfect day had been a cascade of disasters. The wedding cake had collapsed. Apparently, the baker had misunderstood the design specifications and created a towering monstrosity that couldn't support its own weight. The DJ had arrived with the wrong playlist, playing country music instead of the carefully curated selection Sarah had provided. The catering staff had been an hour late, leaving hungry guests waiting while Sarah sobbed in the bridal suite. "The poor thing," my mother said, and I could hear the genuine sympathy in her voice. She worked so hard to make everything perfect. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, trying to sort through my feelings. I wasn't glad that Sarah's wedding had been ruined. I wasn't cruel or petty enough to take pleasure in her pain. But there was something almost cosmic about it all, as if the universe itself had noticed the injustice and decided to balance the scales. Over the next few days, more details emerged through the family grapevine. The photographer, it turned out, had a reputation for reliability that stretched back 15 years. He'd never made such a mistake before. The florist, too, was known for precision and attention to detail. The venue coordinator, who'd worked at the country club for a decade, couldn't explain how the weather contingency plan had fallen apart so completely. "It's like everything that could go wrong did go wrong," my Aunt Margaret told my mother, who relayed the conversation to me. "I've never seen anything like it." It was as if the day itself was working against her. The wedding photos, what few there were, taken by guests on their phones, told the story of a day that had spiraled into chaos. Sarah's face in every image was a study in barely contained panic and devastation. Her new husband, David, looked shell-shocked. The reception photos showed empty tables, the late catering, confused guests huddled inside due to rain, and a bride who clearly wanted to disappear. But it was what I learned the following week that truly revealed the scope of the disaster. Sarah had taken out a substantial loan to pay for the wedding, convinced that perfection was worth any price. She'd booked the most expensive vendors, chosen the most elaborate decorations, spared no expense in her quest to create the flawless day she felt she deserved. When everything went wrong, she demanded refunds, threatened lawsuits, and created such a scene that several vendors refused to work with her. The photographer, claiming the date confusion was entirely Sarah's fault despite her insistence otherwise, refused to refund the substantial deposit. The florist pointed to the signed order form, clearly specifying red carnations. The venue coordinator, after reviewing the contract and weather clauses, determined that the couple was not entitled to any compensation for the indoor ceremony mishap. The caterer, who had eventually arrived and served the food, charged full price despite being an hour late, claiming traffic delays were not grounds for a refund according to their terms of service. Sarah was out thousands of dollars with nothing to show for it but a collection of disaster photos and a marriage that had begun under the worst possible circumstance. The aftermath extended beyond the financial. The stress of the wedding day had apparently triggered a massive fight between Sarah and David. Guests had witnessed heated arguments during the reception, with David publicly questioning why Sarah had been so horrible to the vendors trying to help. The honeymoon had been postponed, indefinitely due to both money concerns and relationship strain. Even more telling was the family's reaction. The same relatives who had supported Sarah's decision to exclude me were now whispering about her behavior. My Aunt Margaret mentioned to my mother that Sarah had been ungracious in her response to the day's problems. Uncle Robert said he'd never seen a bride so focused on perfection that she forgot to enjoy her own wedding. The consensus seemed to be that Sarah had somehow brought the disasters on herself through her obsessive need for control and exclusion of family members. Maybe if she hadn't been so worried about who might overshadow her, she could have focused on what really mattered, my cousin Jessica had apparently said at the disastrous reception. The comment had reached me through the family phone tree, along with the news that several relatives had left early, unable to bear the tension and drama. 3 weeks after the wedding, I received an unexpected visitor. Sarah appeared at my apartment door on a Thursday evening, looking nothing like the composed, confident woman who had excluded me from her life. She was thin, with dark circles under her eyes, and her usually perfect hair hung limply around her face. "Emma," she said, and her voice cracked. "Can we talk?" I invited her in, offering tea, trying to be gracious despite everything. We sat across from each other in my small living room, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. "I know you know what happened," she finally said. I nodded. "I heard it was a difficult day." "Difficult?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's one way to put it. Emma, I need to apologize." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She looked directly at me for the first time since arriving. I was wrong. So wrong. I let jealousy and insecurity poison something that was precious to me. I let other people's comments get into my head, and I convinced myself that somehow you were a threat to my happiness instead of one of the people who's always supported me. I waited, letting her find her words. The truth is, I was scared. Scared that people would compare us. Scared that even on my wedding day, I wouldn't measure up. And instead of dealing with those feelings like an adult, I decided to just remove you from the equation, as if that would somehow make me feel better about myself. "Sarah, I know I hurt you. I know I threw away something irreplaceable because I was too proud and too insecure to be honest about what I was feeling. And now," she gestured helplessly, "everything fell apart anyway. All that effort to create the perfect day, to control every detail, to make sure nothing could go wrong. And it all went wrong anyway." We talked for 2 hours. She told me about the stress of the planning, the pressure she'd put on herself, the way her need for perfection had consumed her relationships and her peace of mind. She apologized not just for excluding me from the wedding, but for the months of silence, the deliberate cutting out, the cruel things she'd said about me to justify her actions. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said as she prepared to leave. "I just needed you to know that I understand what I did. And I'm sorry. You deserved so much better from me. After she left, I sat in my apartment feeling emotionally drained but somehow lighter. The apology didn't erase the hurt, but it acknowledged it. It gave context to the betrayal, and perhaps most importantly, it revealed that the universe had indeed balanced the scales in its own mysterious way. Sarah's pursuit of perfection, her need to control every aspect of her wedding day, including the guest list, had ultimately led to chaos. Her attempt to exclude me, to remove any possibility of being overshadowed, had backfired spectacularly. The very thing she'd feared, being upstaged on her own day, had happened anyway, not through the success of others, but through her own poor choices and the natural consequences that followed. In trying to hurt me, she had only hurt herself. In attempting to diminish my place in the family, she had diminished her own standing. The relatives who had once supported her exclusion of me were now questioning her judgment and character. Her marriage had begun under a cloud of stress and conflict. Her financial situation was precarious due to wedding expenses that had yielded nothing but disappointment. Meanwhile, I had emerged with my dignity intact. I had not begged, had not created drama, had not sought revenge. I had simply continued living my life with grace and integrity. And that choice had been vindicated. The family could see the contrast between my behavior and Sarah's, and it spoke for itself. But perhaps the most profound realization was that karma hadn't needed my help. I hadn't wished for Sarah's wedding to be ruined, hadn't schemed or sabotaged, or sought to balance the scales myself. The universe had simply allowed the natural consequences of her choices to unfold. Her obsession with perfection had made her vulnerable to imperfection. Her need to control everything had left her unable to adapt when things went wrong. Her decision to base her happiness on external validation, rather than internal peace, had set her up for disappointment. 6 months later, I learned through the family grapevine that Sarah and David were in marriage counseling. The stress of the wedding and its aftermath had revealed deep incompatibilities and communication issues that they were struggling to address. Their financial problems had worsened, and they'd had to move in with David's parents. Sarah had fallen into a depression, unable to move past the failure of her perfect day. Around the same time, my children's book was picked up by a major publisher for a 3-book series. The success felt especially sweet, not because it proved anything to Sarah, but because it represented the fruits of staying focused on my own path rather than getting pulled into drama and revenge. At the family Christmas gathering that year, the first one I'd attended since learning about the wedding, Sarah and I spoke briefly. She looked better, though still fragile. She asked about my book deal, and I could see her working to genuinely celebrate my success, rather than letting it trigger her insecurities. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly, "and I'm sorry it took me so long to learn how to be happy for the people I love instead of feeling threatened by their success." It wasn't a magical reconciliation. Too much had been broken for that. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that we both had grown from the experience. She had learned that trying to tear others down only diminishes yourself. I had learned that maintaining your integrity in the face of betrayal is its own reward. As I drove home from that Christmas gathering, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. Sarah's wedding day disasters hadn't been my revenge. They had been the natural consequence of choices made from a place of fear and insecurity. My vindication hadn't come from her downfall, but from my own resilience and growth. The little girl who used to braid dandelions in my hair was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned hard lessons about the cost of jealousy and the price of perfection. And perhaps that was the most profound karma of all, not punishment, but transformation. Not destruction, but the opportunity to rebuild on a foundation of truth and humility. I still had my dignity. I still had my integrity. I still had my success and my peace of mind. And now, finally, I also had my answer. Sometimes the best revenge truly is living well, not because it hurts your enemies, but because it frees you from the need for enemies at all. The perfect day Sarah had tried so hard to create had been impossible from the start, not because of logistics or vendors or weather, but because it was built on a foundation of exclusion and fear. My imperfect day, the day I'd spent alone while my family celebrated without me, had ultimately been more perfect than I'd realized. It had been a day of dignity, self-respect, and quiet strength. And those are gifts that no disaster can take away.